hopefully it's better.
Good job.
Yeah.
Debugging.
Yeah. I've been working on this for like 4 hours, so it's way too long. Like 3 hours today, and now I have returns to bring back. All right. Hello. You're in the right place for San Diego Python. I'm David. I'm one of the organizers, and I'm glad you're here. Be kind. We are streaming to YouTube, but there is we had some AV issues last month. It ended up being okay, but yeah. Anyway, hopefully we've got those worked out. I do want to give a big thanks to Qualcomm for having us here. Thanks to them, and specifically to the engineering development team at Qualcomm. Also a big thanks to Drew, who mans the door, and Urivan, who usually mans the door, but he's not here today. Yeah, woo. So yeah, thank you guys for helping to make this happen. I do have a couple small announcements, and then we'll just get right into talks. It may be a relatively quick meetup today. I think we have 2 planned speakers, and then I'm going to give a talk of last resort, and hopefully we'll wrap up by about 8 or so, maybe 8:10, and then we could have a little networking or something after that. Anyway, a couple small announcements. There's a Saturday meetup. It's at 10 a.m. It meets online on Discord. If you go to sandiegopython.org or you go to the meetup page, all the info's there, how to join the Discord. That meetup is a little bit different from this one. It's a little more, open discussion, roundtable, that kind of a thing. Different people are discussing their own project. You might break out into your own room to discuss it or something, kind of. It's a little more free-flowing than this one. There's not like dedicated speakers or something. So it's different, and that's cool. As I alluded to it, the sandiegopython.org website, that has all the stuff on it if you care about anything San Diego Python. That has a code of conduct. It has a link to YouTube. You can get to like all of our past streams and stuff on there. It's got a link to the Discord. The Discord, I should mention, has a jobs channel for jobs, but there's other channels like a machine learning channel and a web dev channel if you want to get in that. The web dev one is mostly like me working on the San Diego Python website. But that's okay if you have questions and you ask them. There also is a Python questions channel, so that's a good one. A couple upcoming conferences. It's probably a little bit late unless you're about to hop on a plane, but PyOhio is this weekend. So you could hop on a plane and get to PyOhio in Cleveland. But DjangoCon US is coming up in August, August 24th to 28th. And the big one that I'm going to talk about is PyBeach. It's in Santa Monica. This is the Southern California Python conference. I'm helping to run it. It's Saturday, October 24th. It's a one-day thing. It's in Santa Monica. I think the talks are all closed and they're evaluating talks, but tickets are still available. And if you want to sponsor it, let me know. I want to hear it. And the most important single announcement for San Diego Python is that you too can be a speaker at San Diego Python. The biggest button on the website is the Present at a Meetup button. Not coincidental, let me tell you. San Diego Python runs on speakers, people who just say, hey, I worked on this thing over the last week or 2. I'm willing to give a 7-10 minute talk on it. That is what runs the meetup. That is who is coming here. We have a 100% survival rate. Everybody who's presented has lived to tell the tale. And we're always looking for all skill levels. So like whether it's an intro to Python thing, whether it's advanced, super advanced, really topic specific, both of these are great. Anywhere in between is good too. So please, please, please give a talk. If you're preparing for a conference, like you're speaking at PyBeach or something like that, you can give a longer talk if you want to. Just get in touch with me in advance. So we're always happy to have people like preparing a talk or practicing a talk. So that's great. Cool. I think that is it for announcements. Cloudflare paid for the pizza. I'm gonna give a bigger spiel for them in maybe half an hour or 45 minutes. So we'll do that then, but I think I'm done with the initial announcements. And so our first speaker is Christopher Sumnicht, who's going to talk to us about, puny ECS. Would you say it like that? Puny ECS, an attribute query approach to avoiding excessive inheritance. All right. Oh, and then you need this.
Oh, so this one doesn't work then?
That one broadcasts to the room. This one broadcasts to the screen.
Okay, tell me if you have any issues on the stream, and then I can adjust it. Okay. Okay, let's get this thing started up then. It's on there. Okay, there we go. So, hello everyone. My name's Chris. So, you know, I'm not really a big fan of OOP, but you know, like I feel like a lot of people, you either like it or you hate it. Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, as I always say, or as it's always said. And you know, there's always these issues I have with it. So I started working on this like framework, and I also started discovering that there are other like things to do besides for object-oriented programming. So, and I want to make a little preface too before I get too in depth with this talk. So, the line count is usually some metric that we use to judge how good a library is at helping us because it nullifies the line count. This is going to be a little bit different because of two reasons. The examples are going to be small and understandable, hopefully. It's not going to be one long wall of text that you have to read and then say, hey, that one was 100 lines of code and that one was 1,000. Okay? But at that point, you know, we don't really care because we can't read either one. So it is one of those things that scales up. So you have to use your imagination, you know, clear your mind. Imagine you're at work and you hate your life because somebody, maybe you, maybe not you, wrote some code that you regret. And the idea is that you can get this in complex inheritance chain in object-oriented programming. And there's a lot of things that we do to try getting around this, I think. And I'm going to talk about one in games called entity component systems in particular. And I am going to be talking about something that I've been writing. But even before that, I'm going to be talking about something that someone else wrote. So that way you don't feel like, oh, all this guy's doing is just talking about his stuff. I'm also going to talk about other people's stuff. But let's first think about like some classical, good old object-oriented programming, okay? So we might have a game situation. Let's go down to the bottom, actually, where we have a little enemy and we have a little player, okay? So then there's this sort of inheritance chain here that we have this spatial object, which means, maybe I could have just called it spatial without the object, but the idea is that it has an x, y on it, and then there's this idea of a moves trait, okay? So if something moves, it has a velocity in the x, it has a velocity in the y, and both the player and the enemy inherit from it, okay? Again, very small example, but you can imagine at your work there's a probably more complicated problem that has more classes involved, more inheritance involved. Yeah?
So the data class, they were all data classes?
Yeah.
Has a move method?
Yeah, you can put move methods. So you can put methods in data classes.
Okay.
Yeah, just double check. Yeah, but yeah, you can put I found that out. Like I didn't realize that at first, but you definitely can put methods in them too. The good thing is it reduces a lot of boilerplate. So if I didn't use data class, I have to do the whole init and then self.vlx, and then it also makes the inheritance a little bit simpler too. So I'm trying to make OOP look as good as possible. Not that I like doing that, but I have to do that. Okay, so then we want to think about a game. So we make a little player, just a little guy. And then we make an enemy, another little guy. And then we add them to a level. Okay, so just right now, this is simple. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. And the idea is that like this is all we have to worry about. And then we have the idea is that we want to take this world of things that we have. We just have an enemy and a player at this point, but imagine in the game you're developing that there's a more complicated landscape, and we need to process it all. Okay, so this process takes in a world. In this case, the world is corresponding to the level, so it takes in that level that we just defined back here. And then it loops through each one of these things, and it says, well, if it has this moves trait, what should we do? We should move it. Okay? So let's just stop there for a second and think about this for a second. This isn't gonna scale well, okay? Because if we have something else do something else, then we have to do another if statement, and we have to get this sort of long chain of if statements, okay? Not great. But there's even more. There's even more that is problematic with this code, okay? So let's go here and say, well, what if the player is to be moved by a controller? Okay, so you have your Xbox controller or whatever controller you have, and he has to move around and do some things, but he's not going to be moving like an enemy. An enemy's going to be thinking. An enemy's going to do some AI behind the scenes probably and do something. Now, granted, all we're doing here is, in the original move, just incrementing the x and y. But imagine there's something more complicated. Okay? So, we still want to inherit x, y, and vel x and vel y for player, because if you have a controller, you might want to move it around, and it has a certain speed associated with it. It still has a certain placement associated with it. And we have a move with a completely different signature. So I'm going to present a fix, and I want you to tell me how good it looks. So this is the fix, is that we have now introduced a little and statement into the if, and it is saying if the entity is not the player, then we just skip doing that. And then later on, we'll have an if statement for when it is the player, and then do the control for that. Is this going to scale? No, absolutely not, absolutely not. And I know it doesn't look too bad as a thing here, but you wouldn't show your mother this code. Don't do it, okay? So now we get into ECS territory, and I want to show you like sort of the start of the conversation, and then I want to talk about, well, where I took the conversation, or well, where I imagine that I take the conversation at least. So the idea is entities roughly play the role of an object, but the syntax and everything is quite different, as we will see. And you have these things called components, okay? So you can think of components as sort of like traits to add to some entities. So for instance, you could have a component for velocity. You could have one for position. And then you add them to the player and the entity, or in the enemy. Enemy, entity, enemy, entity. So the thing is then we have systems like the process that then operate on queries to these components and then perform actions on the components that they're given in the query. This might sound very abstract at the moment because I mean it's only 3 steps, but I know it can be a little confusing. So let's look at some examples. So let's take a look at Esper. I don't know, does anyone know what Esper is, except for me, obviously? No? Okay, well, it's an entity component system. It's like 600 stars on GitHub. It's very popular, way more popular than mine will ever be probably, but hey, you know what? Esper, E-S-P-E-R? Yeah, so it's called Esper, a very popular ECS library. So what we're gonna do is, well, we're gonna use the same data class thing, actually. Now, they changed it to component, not something I would have done, but hey, I respect it. So they now call data classes components. So we add a component for position, and we have one for velocity. This next slide, though, is where things get very different. Oh, did the mic go out? Oh, okay. Well, okay, I'll speak loud enough. So the idea is now we have this process function wrapped in a class, and we make this query here. Now, I'm not a big fan of this, but I will go and say that it is a great library anyway. But the idea is, well, we check for these components. If it has velocity and position, then what we can do is take the position of that entity. This like implicitly refers to the entity here. This entity is basically just a number. And it says, take its position and add its velocity to it, and take its position and add its velocity to it for both the x and the y. Okay, there's no like self here, which kind of jars me a little bit, but it is what it is, and you know what? Sometimes not having self is a good thing. I mean, it reduces the characters you have to write. And then the idea is that, well, once you've made this class, you register it to potentially multiple processes. So to go back to the example way back here, we just had one process, and I will just focus on one process for the time being. But it could be that you have other things that you want to process, so you can wrap them in a class, and it's a little bit better because now we don't have this long if chain, for instance. It's all wrapped in classes, and we can put them in separate files and organize them and stuff like that. And then different, although I'm a little unfair here, you can do this in one line. Oh yeah, you have a question?
As an alternative, what about everything having a move method? And some of them just pass, and others of them do stuff.
Yes, that is something. So you're talking about like overloading it, but you still have to be careful because if you overload it, well, first of all, it's going to be kind of a weird read on the first code base because you're going to see like move pass, and you're going to be like, well, what is it doing? And then you have to look for the right thing that like kind of, yeah. So that's one thing. There's some other issues. I actually remember thinking about this before this talk, and I can't.
This get components thing that Esper does is just checking to see if those objects have a move method, essentially?
It's checking to see if it has the velocity and position. So it's a little bit, no, it's not checking for move, actually. That's the interesting thing. So it's checking to see if it has, so these data classes as components. So if we haven't actually gotten to the point where it checks that, because it does it in this one, we can add components to entities. So you create them. You can do this in one step, by the way, but you create them first, and then you add components like velocity to a particular object, well, entity, not object. And then you can add position. So now that it has those two components, it will then say, well, all the entities in our world, what we want to do is take their components or find ones with these components and iterate through them. Is that clear? I mean, if it's not, yeah, just let me know because 5-minute talk, okay. Okay, so it does that. And so just to exhibit what this sort of does, if we print the component for the entity player, so this is, I'm honestly not a fan of this syntax, but it's essentially just saying, you know, get the X position of the player. It first starts out at 5, because if you look back at the initialization, we initialized them both at 5. And then when it calls process, it then updates to 5.9. Because what happened is we went through the loop here, and there was one entity that satisfied having both a velocity and a position. It was precisely the player, and so it got incremented. This is, yeah.
I had a quick question. So is the velocity, like this game loop is running all the time?
Yeah.
And so normally a velocity has a time component to it.
Yeah, so you can add those optionally.
But like, so is then the velocity like in a per frame?
Oh, I think so it's not quite the velocity. So there's constant velocity, and then there's dt for the like change in time for every frame that the thing is supplied. And we'll actually see that in mine because I don't decouple it, but you don't. So technically speaking, you can use ECS outside of games, and that's probably part of the reason why. Well, I can't say what for certain since I didn't write the library, but they probably didn't want to make you have to use dt. But the idea is it's common to add dt. So mine does actually add the dt, for instance, by default. So just to make it clear what's going on, typically when you have a game, you have a game loop, and it runs like a frame in your game, like an animation. And what he's saying is, well, we called process, but there was no like change in time between each frame that we had. So typically there is one supplied by the game engine, but we won't get into that into too much detail. Okay, so we avoided the long if chain, the inheritance and the complications that can be that can occur from that is also like sort of removed because we've now put them into components in these queries. Another thing to point out too is that ECS was originally designed, or not originally designed, but one of the benefits of it is that you actually do get a performance boost from this. So I'm not going to worry about the performance boost with mine because you have some caching locality that's associated with the way that you store it internally. I'm not going to worry about it from that vantage point, but that is one thing, and that's something that I'm just going to let you know, like Esper will like beat me on, like for sure. Like the little thing that I'm working on, no chance with the performance. But the point is that I'm worried about ease of use. So we still have kind of an issue with the controller movement. So if we go back for a second, these queries are primitive, and the idea is, well, if I want to check if the controller should be used, I still have to do an if statement to check if like this person has a controller in it, or maybe there's a controller component. Well, even if there is, you still have to do a bunch of checks for this kind of thing. Is that clear with everyone? If not, okay. And so, so yeah, that goes back to what this final point is that we have to carve out the edge case. Now, what I'm going to say is that my library is very focused on this carving out stuff of how do we get the objects that we want to be executed on by process, essentially. Okay, so punyecs. The core ideas is that we use classes like before with standard attributes, and we have a powerful domain-specific language that lets us carve out entities that we want. Okay, and this DSL is going to be based very much on SQL alchemy, if you've ever used that. So it's going to sound weird, like, you know, you don't want your vanilla OOP to be mixed with SQL, but I'm going to mix the vanilla OOP with SQL. So here's the idea. To get rid of some boilerplate, we have these ideas of traits. You can think of these like components, and there's a bunch of imports up at the top. Don't worry about all of those. We'll get to them when we get to them. They're just there, so there's no error. And so we give a trait xy, so it's a position, it's basically a component, technically object, technically not following PEP8, but I don't care. So it should be lowercase p, but no, we're not going to do that because they're going to act like classes. We're going to give a trait position, velocity, and we're going to override the velocity for the player to be 1.2 and 1.2. We could override other things. We could keep things the same. And the idea is the player will then be injected with those traits. Okay, so it's essentially almost equivalent to saying it's a data class with x and y, but it gets rid of some of the boilerplate because we want to do the same thing for enemy because it also has a position velocity. There's no inheritance now. They're not coupled to each other. Okay, is that clear with everyone? Okay, and we still avoid having to do x, y for both of them because we just did the give traits thing. Okay, and then we do the similar setup to before. We have a world, we have a player, and we have an enemy. There's actually no need to put the constructors in since we supplied them already, but don't, you can. So we have a world that's like process. Now we get to see something a little bit different than before. We have this decorator called requirements, okay? And so what happens is there's this decorator that takes in a world and it takes in a bunch of traits. And what it does is says that function below me, every time the world, what did I call it? I forget what I actually, world.process, we'll go with it for now. I forget what I think it was either run or process, I can't remember. But every time the world wants to run, we then basically run that function for every object that satisfies the traits above. So in this case, because it's position plus a velocity, it's going to execute the player and the enemy because they have been given those traits. Okay, is that clear with everyone? Any questions? Yeah.
I was going to ask, are there any circumstances where multiple conditions fit simultaneous requirements, and do you have any notion of
We're going to get to that in a second. Okay, or at least I think we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about querying in a little bit. Okay, and oh, by the way, this also uses the DT that was mentioned. So mine asks for a change between time because when the world updates, it usually has some time that it updates at one point to the next point to the next point. So you can then multiply the velocity by the DT, which I think is what you were getting at. Okay, so then, okay, it was update. Oh my God, don't even know my own library. But it was update, and so when you call update, it then will call move on both the player and the enemy, okay? But now we get back to the critical question, what if the player needs the controller instead of just moving on its own? Well, we can be a little clever with this idea of subject to. So this requirements here is the same as before for this part here. It just works on anything that has a position or velocity, but then we have the subject to constraint, which takes in a constraint object. Okay, and there is a lot of syntax overloading going here, so I'm just gonna kind of skim over that a little bit. But the idea is that you can think of C as sort of the current entity. Okay, I was thinking cursor when I made it, but I'm not sure if that's quite the correct analogy in SQL. But the idea is, well, it's the current row or it's the current entity, and then this is not checks if it's precisely not the player. Okay, this is precisely equivalent to is not in the if statement. Okay, and so what happens is that when you make move, it makes a separate group. So this is another benefit is that instead of checking the if statements every execution, it makes separate groups for them, and then just runs each group. So it's at the beginning that you pay for it, and then you pay with the if, or then you don't have to pay the if statements. So then you have is not player, and then you have then if you want to deal with controller movement, you can do, well, in fact, you don't even need this here. You could, well, actually, no, you do. So this checks if it is the player. So it's another query that we've made. So you might be thinking, this is a pretty simple query. Maybe there's some more complicated stuff. So we can ask, well, what if there are multiple controllers that we need to work on? So you might have a player 1, player 2 kind of situation. They're both heroes, so they both have this hero class. We both give them a position of velocity, but we don't want them to move like the enemies. So this is logical not in this case. And this basically reads, well, if this entity does not have, or if the evaluation of the negation of this controller property is false, or it is true, sorry, if it is true, then we should do move. Okay, maybe I made that a little jumbled here, but the idea basically is you just query through it, you find the enemies that don't have a controller, and then you perform move on it. And then you can do similarly subject to c.controller, which means if it evaluates to true, then you should execute this. And just want to emphasize, there's a lot of different queries you can make here. Okay, so you can do things like less than equal to, and things like that. And basically, it will just like filter out the values. You can also do the is and is not to get fine-grained control over whether you want to get specific objects. And you can make just a massive constraint object and just shove it in there and be good. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
What if there are 2 players, 3 players, multiplayers? This is the idea of a controller.
It works for all. Yeah, because if you have a player, it'll be a hero, and it will have controller equal true. So then all the ones that are controllers will activate this one. It checks if the attribute is true, not if the thing has the attribute. If you want to check if it has the attribute, I do have a has adder equivalent for the query. So you could use that. And you could check if it has an attribute.
I'm just trying to figure out how the controller input ends up in the right place. So the right velocity is added to the right object, the right entity.
So basically, the process loop just goes through every entity. So let me kind of go, let me think about how I want to say this. So basically, they get put into groups based off of these 3 conditions, essentially. Okay? So every object you make that gets added to the world gets put into a group after it is added to the world. Okay? And that group, in this case, means it has to have a position and it has to have a velocity attribute. And then not only that, but we also require that, well, we made an if statement check at the beginning that says, well, if it's not, I mean, if it doesn't have a controller, then you should execute this function. So then it just loops through all of those. But it doesn't mix and match the properties. It just straight up uses them like standard objects, if that makes sense. Or
Take the controller's velocity and add it to the move, add it within the move method on whatever object it's attached.
yeah, you can kind of think of this E right here as like self. So it's like E.x is precisely self.x in the example, and then self.y. And everything with the E gets replaced with self. Does that make more sense? Or is that?
Yeah, I get it.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
I'm new to this ECS pattern. I was curious, what is the, say in this exact example, say you have 2 heroes. It seems like they both match that requirement. They both have the move.
They don't match the move one. They match the move the controller one. Because it's subject to not c.controller.
Oh, okay. Maybe not the best example.
Okay.
My question, though, is how would you handle, I guess, within a match group, like interdependencies? Like you don't want 2 heroes to end up on the same exact coordinate plane, for example. Is that something within the scope of the ECS framework?
Not exactly, I don't think, if I understand your question correctly. But no, I mean, it's fine. But there is something to mention that hasn't been added to Puny ECS that I am intending on adding, which is the idea of having interactions of objects. So the idea that you go through every pair of essentially one entity from one group and one entity from the other group. Not added yet, but something I am considering adding. And generally not an ECS thing from what I've seen. But I could be wrong. Yeah.
Collision detection, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah? And subject to. So it takes all of those together and basically says, like, if it satisfies every one of these requirements, then we're good.
So does it look through them by category, or does it have to look through every entity on the screen?
It looks, well, I mean, it does this once at the beginning. Yeah, at the moment at least. I'm actually thinking about adding some extensions to allow you to update it, but as soon as it's added, it calculates which group it belongs to, and then the process method is basically going through each group and then running the appropriate queries on the groups. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay, then, yeah, I think. Thank you.
All right, and Jorge is our next speaker. Jorge is going to talk to us about type annotations. Are they for me? Right? I sort of think the answer to that question is going to be.
All right.
You can put the lapel mic on you if you want to,
Sure.
or you can talk loud, and then
My voice will probably carry, but let's do that anyway.
you have this thing.
Yes, I have an HDMI.
Oh, you have an HDMI direction?
Yeah,
No, that's not that.
it's on the other side.
Okay, I'll give it to you over there.
Sorry, you laptop.
Looks fancy, good, nice.
It's the company's, not mine. What do you
Pull this up a little bit.
Yeah, what I want to show the entire screen. Start
Okay.
memory.
Oh, things came up. Okay.
Cool. Actually, I'll just talk loud. I don't have the collar for that. Good evening. My name's Jorge. I'm a software test engineer at a company called Insulet, a couple of blocks from here. For those of you that are online on YouTube and remote, that will mean nothing to you, and I apologize. Been there for a while and work with Python every day. We do test automation and acceptance testing for a mobile application for iOS. And yes, Apple is the bane of my existence too. So we had this particular talk at work because I'm kind of unique on my team that I'm a Python developer first and a test engineer second. Right? Whereas most of my colleagues, it's the other way around. So I end up in a lot of discussions teaching folks around best practices on how to use Python, and the subject of typing came up. I will discuss at another time because some of the answers that I would have would not be safe for work as to how this discussion got started. But that is a subject for a different time. So I'm going to jump in the Wayback Time Machine and go back to about 2016, 2015, when I first started learning Python. There were two ways to learn Python. One way was Python 2.7. The other way was Python 3.4, I believe at the time, maybe 3.5. I don't remember because that was a hotly debated topic at the time. 2.7 is now end of life. There is still 2.7 code in production. 3.14.6 is the current version, so we've come a long way. But I was learning, and I would need to create units of work, callables, functions, classes, and so the way that I did it was something like this. I would start with what it is that I wanted to do. I would give it a name. I would define the parameters, and I would figure out what I wanted to return before I wrote any of the business logic. There was good reasons for this. Tooling had just started to become popular around things like documentation strings, and the typing module was non-existent, right? So there was really no way to use type annotations. So this is kind of what we started with. And then, oh yeah, I'm using Git instead of slides because I thought I'd be clever. We'll see how this goes. So if I wanted to fill the function out, it would be something like this. And this actually is born out of a real problem at work because our requirements are software requirement specification, SRS dash, and then a number, right? That's great until you want to try to sort that. And if you want to see an example, we can ask Python if SRS 10,000, or yeah, let's use 10,000, is less than, I should compare two strings. So we'll ask it if SRS 10,000 is less than SRS 9,000, and that is true. And before you go and think you're going to open a bug, this is actually working as intended, right? Because this is how strings compare. Strings compare using something called lexicographical ordering, which is a mouthful of a way to say that it's the same way that you alphabetize things in a library. This is exactly how you would do it. So I had to write a little function to give me the number, and that's what I sort by. right? You pass that as a key to the sorted function. And because I'm returning integers, Python knows how to sort integers. And so I get back the list. So this is what I needed to write, this little helper. Pretty clever. Yeah, this was definitely doing surgery without anesthesia, or the equivalent thereof. So there had to be a better way, and there was. Once tooling got better, we would end up with things like docstrings. This is one of several popular formats. I believe this is the Google docstring format, if I'm not mistaken. I might have that wrong. A lot of IDEs support this. PyCharm does. You can actually set a setting to where you type in triple quotes with a nice function or callable or method on a class, and it'll try to figure it out for you. Doesn't always get it right, but good enough, right? Yes.
If you're looking for the linter and things that use this, it's called Napoleon style.
Yes.
And Google made it their standard.
Correct. Yes. Thank you for that. So for those online that didn't hear that, because you won't have the microphone, you and I do, Google adopted this format. It's called the Napoleon style format. Yeah. So that's where that came from. But this was for many years kind of the way to document your code, right? And if you hover over the name of in this case, the name of the function, the IDE kind of figures it out and gives you a nice little pop-up. Now, here I can tell, but if I'm calling this from another module, right, I don't have to go to the definition to go and figure it out. If I hover over it, I'll still get that tooltip, which is kind of neat, right? Pretty useful. But again, there had to be a better way. Today, we can use type annotations. So what's the first thing that you notice? Yes?
That number is a string.
It is a string. My docstring didn't catch that because I never cast it. I just split a string, and when you split a string, you get a list of strings, right? So now, PyCharm kind of stole my thunder here, but it helped me catch a problem. And this is what type annotations are meant to do. They're meant to be used with third-party tooling. In this case, the PyCharm has a type checker kind of working in the background and help you catch problems with your code. The example that I showed previously would have run. It wouldn't have given me the output I wanted. That is called a logical bug. Those are the hardest ones to figure out because you think you got it right. And the computer is saying, I'm doing exactly what you're telling me. What's your problem, bro? It's not really saying that. If it does say that to you, please get help. But in any case, back to my original point, it found a problem, right? And so tooling will also help us when problems are detected like this. So we're going to fix that as soon as I get rid of this pop-up here that lets me do the thing I want. And so now, we'll check out this revision. So now it's fixed. Now I get, and yeah, there should be a space here. Sorry. I hope that I fixed, that was my own OCD that I'm fixing. So now I'm getting a string and I'm returning an integer and life is happy. So if this is a pretty easy example. So why isn't it used everywhere? Well, a couple of reasons. One, as I said, typing was introduced, the typing module was introduced into Python in Python 3.5. And oh boy, it was rough. It wasn't really not rough until like Python 3.11, right? That's when things started to really work nice. And you're gonna see an example of that. But one of the things that came out of the meeting, and I've said this before to people at work, is that you should use type annotations as documentation, but don't commit an atrocity to make a type annotation work, right? And when does that happen a lot? Well, Python is a dynamic language in many respects. I don't want, oh, ports checkout because I changed something. It is a dynamic language. There is this phenomenon called polymorphism, where you have different objects that can behave, and by behave mean have similar methods, in the same way. So Python does this with multiplying. What types can you multiply in Python? Strings by integers, right? What else? Arrays. Well, actually, I think you can also multiply arrays too, although I'd have to try it. Yeah. So how do you type hint that? Actually, it's a lot easier today, right? If you're doing things properly. But before PEP 695, which was, I think, in Python 3.10, you had to do something like this. This is outlawed by the Geneva Convention. This is an atrocity. Don't do this. However, if you are a library author, you didn't have a choice, right? Or well, you had a couple of bad choices because your consumers are expecting you to tell them what their type signatures are because they have IDEs like this. And so if you want your library to be used, you either had to write a lot of documentation that people really don't want to read, or you provide the type hints you wanted. And so the earlier projects that had type hinting, you'll see this all over the code. This is a mess. But it's a mess because Python didn't have the tools at the time. Yes?
What's the point of having this RT type there?
Because I need to make sure that this type is the type I take in and the type I take out, and that it has to fulfill this protocol. There was no way to easily do that before like Python 3.10.
Otherwise, you have something like
It could take an int or a float. And so the way most type checkers will look at it, if you didn't do something like this, it's like I give up and it's going to be any.
So that T is representing any type, and the deep count has to be an N. So
In this particular case, right, the way this works, this is why typing is hard. It's much easier nowadays, but I'll explain to you how this works. Type var just says that I'm going to create an object that represents a type called T. So here, when I declare this protocol, it is of type T, and it returns the same type when you multiply by it. In other words, let's take a string. I take a string A, I multiply it by 2, I need to get a string back.
And so this repeatable type is just recognizing that pattern.
Correct.
Any type, integer type, that are multiplied together that return the original type.
Even simpler, it is any type that implements dunder mul.
Yeah.
With this particular argument. So it has to have a single integer argument that is repeat count.
Technically, you can mul by something that is not an integer, and you can have a type that has mul and can't be multiplied
By an integer, yes. That is a possibility. So, but like I said, this is an atrocity. And if my strong suggestion is don't do this unless you are a library author and you have no other choice. Or you can do what I did, which is move to a more modern version of Python, which actually makes this a whole lot easier, and it's through something called generics. I won't go into what that is, because honestly, that's like a 45-minute talk. Why am I not checking this out? Yeah. Well, because it wants me to check out the entire branch. Because it is the latest, you're right. So today, I can use generics and I can use the protocol directly. This is readable. This is parsable. If you've never looked at typing before, you could probably sit and stare at this for about 2 minutes and it kind of makes sense, right? I've defined something that's repeatable. It's multiplied by an integer. And now I take the the double function takes a number that is a repeatable and returns a repeatable. And if you work in other languages, and you work in languages that have protocols, this is kind of what it looks like. For my sins, I'm working on an iOS project. I have to know how to read Swift occasionally. And that's how protocols are implemented. Pretty much this way. This is much more readable. So if you're going to do type hinting or type annotations like this, it's the same thing. This is how I suggest you do it. Right? And it still does the same thing. If I hover over it, I still get the nice tooltip. It takes a repeatable, it returns a repeatable. If I need to check to see where repeatable is, I look at the definition. I don't think it'll let me if I hover over it, it'll tell me, well, it'll tell me it's a class. I have to go look it up. Maybe a suggestion for the PyCharm folks. I had them at PyCon. I could have suggested it. I didn't think of it. So type hinting, is it for you? I suggest you use it like the way you use your documentation. And you're going to find a little bit of a side effect, which is really not the focus of this talk. But by thinking in types, when you're working with callables, your code cleans itself up. You tend to have less spaghetti, less ravioli code, less pasta code, and I'm thinking of pasta because it's past my dinner time. So I'll open the floor for questions. Yes?
Type annotations or Hungarian notation?
The question is type annotations or Hungarian notation, type annotations, and it's not close. And-
Hungarian for C. If you're
Yeah.
programming C, you can use Hungarian. No.
So yeah, so for people that don't know what Hungarian notation is, it's where you put the something to identify the type it is as part of the variable name. There's actually languages that used to do this. Anybody remember BASIC? Yeah, BASIC, the way you defined a string in BASIC, at least in IBM BASIC, was it had a $ in the variable name. And there were two types. There were strings and floats, and that's it.
Way I remember Hungarian is you start with an I and you capitalize the N.
Yeah,
I number
yeah.
and F.
I think that even dates back to like COBOL days, where you had 2-letter names for everything. Now, it's a little cheaper.
I and then the word capital
Yeah.
N number and for F capital N number for floats or N.
Yeah.
For D for double.
Yep.
We even have double.
So it would look something like this, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
And then you had multiple prefixes that had other attributes.
yeah,
Ridiculous.
that way lies madness.
I still use it in a reverse weird way. If
Not
there's an
just
S, if there's an S on the end of my variable, if it's plural, it's a list.
Okay, so Hobson is saying that his convention is that there is an S at the end of the world. It's a list.
Or it's an interval.
I would even say that if it has an S at the end, that it's a collection, right? It's a collection of things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So plural nouns in general, and that's actually a good convention to follow because that's the way your brain would work anyway. You see ducks, you're expecting more than one duck. We can discuss the minutia of what kind of collection it is somewhere else, list or some kind of generator sequence or something. Any other questions? That's all I got. You're welcome. Okay. And I mean, you can decide whether you want to do yours at 8 o'clock.
I think I'll do it real quick. It's a quick talk, and we'll do it. Oh, I have one other announcement that I forgot to announce earlier, and that is that next month's, check the meetup page for next month's meetup, because it won't be in this auditorium. It will be in the cafe, like a couple blocks from here. Just, we got bumped from this room. We lost to somebody. Cool. And then I need this thing. Then hopefully this just works. Something worked. Hey, things are, well, it came up for me, so I think it's going to be up here. There we go. All right. Awesome. I know I talked about it a little earlier, but Cloudflare paid for the pizza. The meetup is sponsored by Cloudflare in that regard. Cloudflare makes networks and websites faster and more secure. They provide awesome tools like web app firewalls, DDoS protection, R2, which is like an S3 compatible storage, and much, much more. The Cloudflare network is massive. 95% of internet connected people are within 50 milliseconds of a Cloudflare node. And this makes your site fast for people all over the world. So especially if they're really far, it makes a big difference. Check it out, and the free plan is really generous. The San Diego Python website uses it. And if you missed my DDoS talk from last month, you can see how it helped with that. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Cloudflare. Awesome. And then I am the speaker of last resort. So we were short one speaker. So I'm actually giving a repeat talk here. But what's kind of interesting about this is this talk is from 4 months ago, 5 months, 4 months ago, 3 months ago. And a bunch has changed because, you know, AI, I guess, whatever. So this is something that was very timely for me then. I was debugging a Django performance issue, and I was using Google's Antigravity to help me with this. After I banged my head against it a couple times, I deployed with what I thought had fixed this multiple times, and none of that worked. And then we let Antigravity take a couple cracks at it, and it was definitely wrong the first couple times too. So, but we did together get to the end of it. So I'm going to talk about that. So what is Google's Antigravity? This is the outdated part. It's an agent-first IDE for developers? Not anymore. Nope, it's a command line thing just like Claude Code. So yeah, this whole thing about agent-first IDE, you can use it with any IDE now. But I actually really liked the IDE, and I'm kind of sad that it's going away. It was built on VS Code, so you could use all your same themes and extensions. And that was really cool. The big difference, and I'll show what this means a little bit more, is that it was agent first. And that actually meant more than a buzzword when I get to it. Like literally reviewing code and instructing the agent were kind of co-equal parts of the IDE. They took up the same physical screen real estate roughly. And so, you know, it kind of was a rethinking of the IDE in the agent world. I actually kind of liked it, but now I just use the command line version like everybody else. Out of the box, it worked with a couple curated LLM models, mostly Google's, but it also supported OpenAI's and Claude's. There are ways to make it work with a local model, though, if you really wanted to. The command line, you can do that. I think it's just a configuration option, and it was free. And the Google Gemini model's free plan was reasonably generous. You could get your feet wet pretty good without paying anything. And then at 20 bucks, you could like use more than is reasonable. I have the obligatory XKCD of import antigravity. I couldn't pass this up given the name. Import antigravity actually does work in Python. If you've never typed it into the REPL, you should do it. But we'll leave it at that. It's still, like now the command line tool is antigravity. It's the executable, or you mean in the Python REPL? Google is not very good at naming things, so I'm gonna go out on a limb here. It's still there, but they're not updating it really anymore. So, I mean, VS Code's not going away. I think that they're kind of not upgrading it anymore. Now, I think everything goes through the Antigravity CLI tool, which is not the Gemini CLI tool, which is the first. So they used to have the Gemini CLI tool and the Antigravity IDE, and now the Gemini CLI tool is deprecated. The Antigravity IDE is kind of deprecated. You can still get it. The Gemini CLI literally says, download the new thing. And then now it's the Antigravity CLI, which they have named AGY. So you execute it with AGY, because if you typed Antigravity, it launches the IDE. It's confusing. I admit it. I'm not defending that, whatever. Yeah, this is what the IDE looks like, and you can kind of see on the thing, you know, it looks like a normal editor, except half the screen is talking to the agent. However, I don't want this whole presentation to just be like me shilling a Google product, so I want to dive into something and talk about it, and talk about like real world performance issues and how this, you know, helped me solve it a little bit. It wasn't the kind of thing where you just typed in the agent prompt and it just one-shotted it, let me tell you. So this is what a performance issue looks like. This is New Relic. I'm looking at a couple hours of time right here, and you can kind of see I have kind of peak traffic. I did a deploy. Performance was worse. I thought, oh, maybe it'll get better. So I sat around for like 20 minutes and hoped. And then when it didn't, I deployed, and there was a little spike there during the deploy, and then performance went kind of back to normal. And I was like, yay, performance is back to normal. And I specifically kind of knew that I was changing something big, so I deployed this like at the lowest traffic time. I mean, we didn't have downtime. You know, we have no downtime deploys, but you know, that's when you test the stuff you're not sure of, I guess is the right way to put it. So you can kind of see this performance blip. I had to roll it back. It didn't work out. This was probably like my 6th attempt to fix this performance problem. Cool. So okay, Google, fix it. This was kind of my prompt. And you can kind of see it's a pretty detailed prompt here. I said, you know, oh, I merged something, causes significant performance degradation. My P50 on this view went from 60 milliseconds to 85 milliseconds. And I waited till my caches are filled. So I waited a couple minutes because caches get filled. The first requests are usually slower, which you can kind of see here. The first requests were slower, and then the caches got filled and performance got a little better. This change was this pull request, which you can look at in the Git log. You know, I looked at my new relic, blah, 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 whatever. You can kind of see, like, I gave it a bunch of, I had problems and was trying to fix them. So I didn't just say, okay, Google, like, fix my performance problems. That's kind of not going to get you anywhere. You know, you have to talk about the magnitude of it. And it proposed a couple, like, really bad ideas, first of all. It was like, oh, you know, like, I'm doing a bunch of, like, denormalized stuff in my views to try to boost performance that you would not do in a regular project. And it was like, you should strip all of that out. And no, like, if I deployed that, my site would just crash. So it took a little back and forth to get to something that wasn't terrible. And I cut a bunch of that out. But you know, I did have some ideas here about what the performance might be. I specifically thought, oh, you know, this might be a problem with I'm pulling too much data out of the database. And one of the things that doesn't show up a lot of times in performance data is not just, hey, my database was slow. My database may be queried in X number of milliseconds. But then if I pull too much data out of the database and you convert the data from the raw over the wire format into Python objects, that part can be slow too. So I kind of talked through some of these problems, and finally, I kind of suspected that that was the problem, but I didn't know exactly how to fix it is kind of the real answer. But eventually we got to something, you know, what I like about Antigravity, both the command line and the IDE, is kind of this plan mode where, you know, you tell it the problem, you have some back and forth discussion, and then it says, I'm going to create this document of the plan that I'm going to do before it just starts writing code and executing things. And I kind of like that aspect where you plan ahead, and then you can kind of propose feedback on the plan that the agent might do. I remember when go ahead, Hobson. When I first gave this presentation, I remember it's in my notes that I said, Hobson's not here, you know, so I can say all the crazy things that I did. What are your questions? The Antigravity has absolutely no ability to connect to the live database.
This deployment to the server.
Oh, yeah.
Saw the blip.
Yes.
You don't have a staging server where you can just hit it with a bunch of queries and see what happens.
Not easily. I can't generate the load that I would get. I mean, these problems, you don't encounter them from 1, 10, 100 requests. You have to time things over thousands of requests to get something that. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, correct. I'm testing in production. But smartly. Smartly. Yes, correct. Anyway, so like this is one of the things that I like about the Antigravity IDE is it has kind of this plan mode where it says, here's what I'm going to do. And you know, I feel like some of the different tools are starting to converge on this plan, but I feel like Antigravity was kind of, they were there first on that. I feel even before Claude, they were kind of doing that. And you can kind of lock down the commands that it executes and stuff like that. You can have, oh, these are the only ones that it's allow listed and all those kinds of things. One of the things that was kind of interesting, this is the fix actually, which you can kind of see here. You can see this is kind of using like what this ends up being in Postgres. If you were to look at the actual SQL that this generated, this is like a case and a when statement, which I knew existed in Postgres and had used before in other cases, but didn't actually know that there was like an easy way to do that in Django, which was kind of interesting. I didn't know that, so it knew things that I didn't know about. You know, that when I saw it did this, I immediately like looked at the Django docs and was like, oh, yes, they must have added that since the last time I read these. But that was kind of interesting that it ended up fixing it. I don't just YOLO and deploy what the agent writes into production. I review everything and have pull requests just like rational human beings should do. Reviewed the code, said, I think this is going to work, and then deployed to production, and maybe on the 7th time after it got reviewed, on the 7th time when I put this code in, it worked. So I was pretty happy, and the performance was back to normal. Because I was adding a feature, so I added the feature took hold, and I didn't decrease performance. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just not familiar with the Django RM language. Can you walk us through in a little bit more granularity? Because I think.
Oh yeah. So under normal conditions, what this left side does is it says, okay, I have this group of flights, which is a series of objects. You could think of this as like an SQL query that returns a bunch of objects from one table. And then a prefetch related, basically in Django, what this means is I'm going to fetch a bunch of things that have a foreign key to the flights table. So I'm going to fetch a bunch of things that have foreign keys to the flights table so that I can access them like flights dot other objects. Not that a flight has a foreign key to that thing, but that the other thing has a foreign key to flights, if that makes sense. So it's a little different. And I'm prefetching these, but with some conditions. So I'm saying, okay, I'm fetching this advertisements list, and only if they match certain features, and then I'm putting them into an attribute called matching ads, and then I'm also fetching another table off of that. And in this case, it did essentially the same thing, except it used a when clause and a case, which also has a case clause in SQL. Oh, here's the case clause, actually. And so it only fetched a certain number. It basically said, okay, find all the matching advertisements and only grab the maximum priority out of them, which is what I wanted. So I'm basically saying, I have this set, grab all the things from this other set, but I only want the one with the maximum value, which you could totally do in SQL. And this ends up generating the right query to do that. Yes, Hobson.
It's been a while since I've done Django, but dunders between words in a variable or query or an argument to something like where or when, that's representative of a relationship.
Yes, that crosses a foreign key boundary, except for the last one, which will then be an attribute on it. Yes, correct. Yeah?
It's like the dot. It's like
Yes.
a double underscore in an argument name is like a dot in a class name or a table ORM name or whatever.
Yeah, so it's still prefetched, but it prefetched a smaller set is kind of the end result of this. And as a result of prefetching a smaller set, because I specifically, well, you can't see this, but when I looked at this in New Relic, I can actually see that the database-specific performance, the query performance was not slower. The Python performance was slower. And so I knew, hey, this isn't, the database is slow kind of a thing. But because this fetched a smaller set, the hydrating that many things from the databases over the wire protocol into Python objects was faster because there are fewer of them. And when you're dealing with things that have thousands or whatever of objects like that, that time can be the difference between 60 milliseconds and 85 milliseconds, apparently.
And annotation in Django table without actually adding another column.
Yes, usually you're doing, an annotation is virtually always like a sum, anything that would have a group by clause, except you're not just returning the thing from the group by clause, you're adding that into the result set. Yes.
It's like it's adding a synthetic column.
Yes.
With a value that has some aggregation.
Yes, but the value is an aggregation. So it's similar to an aggregation, but in Django, when they say an aggregation, like you're usually just getting the aggregated value, and an annotation will get you the aggregated value and the rest of the result set. I think that's it. Here were the links. I was familiar with the Postgres case statement and had used it in other cases, but had not used it in this case, and it was kind of interesting, but the agent nailed it. After I reviewed it, I then had to go to the documentation and like, it was in the pull request that got reviewed. Yes.
I've never seen Lin before. Is it similar to where?
It's like a switch case.
Yeah. So you can have kind of like a switch case on a join or on a filter. So you can say, oh, I want to filter these, but only if they match. Like, that's kind of a bad example. Like, here's an example. I want to have an aggregation or an annotation on my result set, but only where the annotation matches some subset, which is that's actually exactly what I wanted here. So I wanted to only get the maximum value. So it essentially filtered my annotation, if that makes sense. Yes, Jorge.
I thought that you answered my question, but I wanted to make sure. Does this kind of like push the filtering down to the database layers if you're getting this data back?
Both of these prefetched at the database layer. The right one did more filtering on the annotation before it came back.
Before it came back. So you're sending less stuff along the wire with this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This got a little bit complicated, but that was my last slide. All I have is resources and questions. So any other questions? I feel like I answered a bunch of questions, but anybody else have questions? All right. Well, that wraps up the meetup. Again, thank you to the speakers. You can become a speaker and prevent me from having to give another talk. That would be great. Thanks to Qualcomm. Thanks to Cloudflare. Thanks to the speakers. Remember, next month is at Cafe S instead of here, or whatever, Building S. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. And if you want to hang out, we finished up a little early, and so we can have a little bit of networking if you want to, but no pressure. Do whatever you want. Yeah. Well, you have to be out of here by 9. But all right. Well, the AV stuff went better than expected today. I was kind of, things weren't working, and then they were working. So the 2x is the CLI, and the.
So they actually have graphical both. They just split the IP for the sample. So if you go to the 2x URL in Google, antigravity.google/, the rest of it.
Yeah.
I can send you the details if you want.
No, I know it. Antigravity.google.
There's a -2
Yeah.
URL. After they put like /IDE, you just get the ID part. They broke it
So
into different IPs.
Okay, I'll have to look, because I think when you download that, you still get the 1x IDE.
Yes,
It just uses like a newer version of the models and stuff. I don't know. Well, I'll check it out.
it's Google, right?
It's Google. They're really bad at this. I'm going to stop the stream.
They often release like 12 different versions of